This video is an assignment for sociology class, Body and Society, at San Diego State University. The purpose of the assignment is to help inform us on key issues related to sociology of the body. The positions being advocated may not necessarily reflect the opinions of the students developing this video.
Hi, my name is Brooke Bain. Today I'm going to be discussing childhood development of gender construct and how when we are young, gender is constructed through different aspects of society, especially through traditional stereotypes and our environment growing up. I'm going to be discussing how family dynamics and traditional roles shape gender expectations from an early age, how toys reinforce what is deemed acceptable for women, and the impact of beauty standards and media during childhood. One of the biggest ways our ideals of gender are formed is through our familial settings. Parents have a huge impact on the development of gender roles for their children, as they are their first teachers who set gender norms through the way they act, the expectations they set, and the type of encouragement they give to certain behaviors linked to gender. Research from Leaper 2014 dives into this, talking about traits and abilities that parents assign to gender, such as boys are aggressive, girls are good at reading, and men are scientists, as well as conducts that in Western cultures, the most consistent way parents treat girls and boys differently is by encouraging them to engage in gender stereotyped activities. For example, girls are told to like dolls and makeup, whereas they rarely are encouraged to play football. Toys are also extremely influential in shaping our perceptions of gender and what is considered girly. Parents are more likely to provide toy vehicles, action figures, and sports equipment for their sons, and they're more likely to give dolls, kitchen sets, and dress-up toys to their daughters. For example, traditional toys like action figures and toy trucks are often not associated with girls, whereas dolls are the gender norm, which further creates implications about what a woman's role is. Norgaard 2025 describes this impact. When toys restrict a child's imagination about their possibilities, it stifles development and creates a ripple effect, proving the point that gender inequality in adulthood begins with child's play. This highlights the profound influence of toys on shaping a child's perception of their abilities and future possibilities. Beauty standards and media also shape gender roles, such as through movies and sports. Here are some examples of figures from movies I'm sure we've all seen growing up. Notice the women's physiques, never overweight and often an hourglass figure. This enforces a beauty standard and expectations of roles in women. These beauty standards are often emulate messages about women's roles too, such as the story of Snow White, which basically gives the message that women need to wait around for a man to save them. These sociological topics that relate to this are body idiom and the trouble body. Hausen describes body idiom as the particular gestures and positions that imply how power is displayed between men and women. For instance, Goffman suggests that images in women are seated and men are standing convey a sense of male authority. Add a man's hand to a woman's shoulder, and this image becomes one that is suggestive of sexual ownership. Body idiom shows how our social interactions lead to power implications, which is particularly influential in childhood development. The concept of the trouble body shows how girls are taught to perceive their bodies with societal expectations. From a young age, there's pressure to conform to ideals that can shape a girl's sense of self-worth and influence how she interacts with the world around her. Challenging gender roles and promoting equality are essential steps towards dismantling the societal norms that limit women and shape their perceptions and opportunities from a young age. We can challenge these roles by not identifying certain objects and activities and traits to one gender, but to anyone no matter if they're a girl or boy, as well as how we can keep pushing for women equality and help shift the power dynamics in workplace, sports, media, and home spaces. Gender norms not only shape how women see themselves, but also hinder their ability to assert authority or pursue non-traditional paths. So it's important that we recognize this impact and try to create a change for our future generations.
Hi, my name is Amanda McGee, and I will be discussing women's role in sports. In this video, I will cover how female sports are constantly being underrepresented. Along with that, I will highlight how women and men take on specific roles when it comes to sports, and how society keeps demanding and driving these roles, making them stay alive. Lastly, I will discuss how the impact of certain female players have brought more awareness to women's sports as a whole, making them rise in popularity. The first point I'll be talking about today is the sociological concept of androcentrism. Androcentrism is a male-centered worldview where men are constantly at the center of everything. While this is primarily evident in medical fields, it still applies to overarching gender norms and how men have always been granted more power and influence over women. As stated in the Body and Society textbook, in the late 19th century, women were believed to be physically frail and delicate and to have smaller brains than men. This prevented women from playing sports as they weren't considered strong enough for the aggressive nature of sports. In 1972, only 1 of 27 high school girls played varsity sports. In 1998, that figure was 1 in 3, whereas 1 of every 2 boys participated in varsity high school sports. Unfortunately, our society still holds traditional gender roles as standard for men and women. Another sociological concept that relates to men constantly being seen as stronger or more fit for sports, making them more popular than that of women, is hegemonic masculinity. Hegemonic masculinity focuses on how men are supposed to be extremely masculine and not portray any signs of femininity. For example, this includes being very muscular, not doing any sissy stuff, or taking risks and having self-reliance. A prime example of this is the picture shown here of The Rock. He takes on the role of looking and acting very masculine. This implies the idea that women should not act like this and that it is only for men. Unfortunately, sports can be aggressive, requiring players to be athletic, competitive, and even hold some of the hegemonic masculinity traits. This constantly reminds our society that it is abnormal for females to be competing in sports, which is a prime reason for why female sports aren't as popular. While women's sports aren't as popular, one player in particular is helping this problem. Basketball, especially college basketball, is a fan favorite. Because of its popularity, there is a very famous tournament every year called March Madness. There are both men and women's brackets for this tournament. However, normally the women don't get as much attention as the men's tournament. However, recently that changed. NCAA mentions how for the first time the women's title game drew more viewers than the men's, averaging 18.7 million viewers on ABC and ESPN and peaking at 24 million viewers. The player that helped this change is Caitlin Clark from the University of Iowa. She helped her team win many games, break records, and create buzz around the women's basketball as a whole. I was actually in New York City the other week, and on the subway I noticed an ad or promotion for women's basketball in the March Madness tournament. This ad asked 2 truths and a lie for knowledge about women's college basketball. And although the interactive ad is simple, I thought it was interesting. Usually men's teams are the ones that get attention for promoting sports. However, now that is changing. Overall, women's sports and females in athletics are starting to rise in popularity, and it is extremely important to recognize this, as women have constantly been underrepresented and undervalued. Although sports might seem like just a highly competitive game, they reinforce broader societal ideas that overall translate to power structure and roles in society.
Hello, my name is Eden Savick, and I will cover how women are portrayed and sexualized in the media. Women have been objectified and put into specific gender roles for decades, even before the rise of social media. But now, more than ever, deep-rooted issues are embedded into social media where women are being sexualized and used for the use of advertising and gaining followers or attention. To begin, while women are portrayed and sexualized in the media, it essentially promotes unrealistic beauty standards. Oftentimes, advertising and entertainment industries set these standards by photoshopping and manipulating images, creating the idea that women need to fit into these impossibly unrealistic ideals. This photo of Kim Kardashian shows the before versus after what is shown in the media. You can see she embodied a perfectly healthy and beautiful body in the before, but in the after, her waist and body were slimmer, her face was airbrushed, and her skin color was even changed. These unrealistic beauty standards that are promoted in the media not only distort the way women view themselves, but also reinforce the gender role that a woman's appearance determines their value. From the pressure of these unrealistic beauty standards, always having the feeling of needing to look perfect can cause psychological and physical distress. What's represented in the media reinforces the toxic expectation that a woman's worth is tied to her physical appearance. Women can spiral down a deep hole of issues, often leading to anorexia, all because of what they see in the media. This quote on the screen highlights the serious and possible life-altering consequences based on people's obsession with being thin, all stemming from the media. To continue, women are hypersexualized and objectified in the media, especially in advertisements and in fashion. Depending on little things such as posture, facial expression, makeup, or camera angles can hypersexualize a woman and make her an object. As seen in this photo of model Heidi Klum, she's wearing a tight black dress with a full face of makeup with her finger in her mouth with a burger, indicating all very sexual things when it doesn't need to be. Advertising companies do this to help sell a product, typically to entice the male audience. Constant sexualization perpetrates harmful gender stereotypes that value women's physical attractiveness over qualities, in addition to reducing them nothing to more than objects of desire. Some critical issues are gender stereotyping and exploitation. There's a belief that women should abide by men. The idea that how women's bodies belong to the public and that their worth is determined by how well they conform or challenge gender norms is reflected by this type of exploitation. Ultimately, women's engagement online is scrutinized by both gender stereotyping and online harassment, which confines them to outdated gender norms and penalizes them from what they deviate from. Two sociological concepts are the male gaze and gender performity. The male gaze is the concept of how women's bodies are objectified in everyday life and in the media, often for men's approval or judgment. The idea of gender performance is that gender is not something one is, but something one does. Gender performance over social media typically leaves space for women to be hypersexualized and objectified. These concepts highlight how cultural norms shape women's identities on social media, resulting in gendered power and objectification.
Hello, my name is Ariana, and I will be covering domestic policy regarding women's gender roles in society. Policy has a lot to do with gender roles of women in society. Many policies not put in place by women but by men. My particular focus is domestic policy regarding the different aspects of gender roles in the fields we will be covering. These includes policies and regulation within sports, social media, and childhood development. One of the multiple aspects of gender roles in society pertains to women in sports. This is a growing field for women and becoming incredibly popular and more accessible for many in the United States. Although there is more popularity, sports for women comes with its own politics and policies that affect women and young girls who would like to pursue a career in sports. There have been many pushes for legislation within this area throughout history, and an important piece was Title IX. This outlined the progression of women and young girls in sports and the accessibility of sports programs to females on all levels. Despite this title being passed, there are still lots of inequality and equity disadvantages within sports for women, and this can be seen through pay for professional athletes, media coverage, and funding. Title IX is very important and prominent in the United States policy, but this can be compared to European countries that have different regulations and policies when it comes to women in sports. It's important to look both at domestic and international policy, not only to compare, but to see what other countries are doing in their societies for women. There are many barriers explained in an article by author Raquel Vaquero that has outlined gender equity in sports from the perspective of European women athletes and women in the sporting world, getting insight into their experiences, stating, although gender equality policies exist, actions to achieve gender equality are more limited and patriarchal language. Gender stereotypes and profiling of people still persist, making it difficult for women to work in this area. Childhood development is also a crucial piece of how society views gender roles, especially women's roles. Children in the United States spend a majority of their childhood in a classroom environment, which means that they're taking in lots of information about the world at a young age, sometimes having the power to shape their views and values as they grow. By children learning about gender roles, gender identity, and what that represents in society, they are able to be more rounded members of society and are able to stop a cycle of male-female binary. Also, many social justice issues can now have more progress if you teach children these values at a younger age. There are countless different approaches to how you can teach kids about gender stereotypes, but it is important to note that new legislation and different state laws have now limited curriculum that may contribute to teaching children about gender identity and perpetuate disparities like removing gender-neutral restrooms. There is lots of research that has to do with childhood development, touching on how gender is integrated into our society and how policies affect the systems in the United States has placed in order to keep certain gender roles in society. Social media and media in general has a large and impactful effect on how gender is seen in the United States, especially in its depiction of women in media. The media is powerful, and with power comes consequences, and in this case, there have been both positive and negative impacts on women driven by the media. Although there has been significant progress in civil rights, there still seems to be a strong amount of objectification, sexualization, and gender-based stereotypes in the media, especially towards women. These negative ideals have led to an increase of sexual harassment, sexual violence, and sexual abuse from men towards women and children. This can be seen all over media and is only being reinforced through different media avenues like TVs and movies. There is not enough regulation over the media to hold this type of content that targets certain groups, and younger girls are now taking in a whole new range of content that is damaging to their physical and emotional well-being through social media.
Hi, my name is Ellery, and I will be talking about women's gender roles internationally. Worldwide, there is an inequality between men and women. Whether you have personally experienced this or not, it definitely exists, and is very interesting how different cultures portray this. Things like the wage gap and overall gender gap are very prevalent. Hounson in our textbook, The Body and Society, talks a lot about gender as a performance when it comes to doing gender. This includes things like what women wear, marriage status, how they act, etc. One example is how in India, women are expected to dress modestly and can be more restricted in public places. In addition to this, arranged marriages are a large part of this culture, and this practice is rooted in the idea that women must marry for support and guidance, rather than because they love someone. This traditional practice is a result of overall patriarchal family structures and economic roles. A significant majority of Indians, 87%, agree that a wife must always obey her husband, with 64% expressing complete agreement. Pew Research Center. This perspective shows the traditional patriarchal norms prevalent in many households, by women in this culture being practically forced to do what the norm is. This shows how they do gender and keep it going. On the other hand, Sweden promotes gender equality and neutrality. They recognize that there is an inequality among men and women, and they actively try to avoid and get rid of this. With both of these examples, the United States compares in some ways and not in others. Within our culture, many women can challenge traditional gender norms by rejecting them. They could reject marriage norms, household norms, or things in general. Many women also conform to these norms, reinforcing how the culture has been for many years and generations. Hounson refers to this as embodied gender norms and says how societal expectations shape the way individuals present their bodies, reinforcing tradition. It is almost like a performance that we put on, yet it is ingrained in us to act this way. Thank you for listening.